Hello and welcome to the Epitome. I am your host, Nathan Bozeman, and today we're going to be discussing the difference between the Protestant and the Catholic Ten Commandments. Let's get into it. Now, some of you might be thinking, are the Ten Commandments different for Protestants and Catholics? And yes, there are some differences that we're going to get into, but overall, it's not that big of a difference. But I know that some of you might disagree on that, but we're going to hopefully find some common ground today. And if you're a Catholic and you're waiting on me to basically call you guys pagan idolaters that took out the second commandment so that you could bow down to statues, I'm not going to do that today. And if you're a Protestant waiting for me to call all the Catholics pagan idolaters that's bowing down to statues, I'm not going to be doing that. This is not that video today. And I actually, at the end of this video, I'm going to have one suggestion that will hopefully help in the dialogue on this topic. All right, so this video is going to be a little bit different. I'm going to try to do this in one take, so hopefully that works out. I've never done this before, so I guess I'll just be a little bit more okay with mistakes. Normally, if I make a mistake, I stop and say something again, but I'm going to try to just go through this, and hopefully that works out. As you can see, I've kind of got some things underlined here. This is where I'm going to draw your attention where the differences are. And so this is the Protestant Ten Commandments on the left side, and then the Catholic Ten Commandments are on the right side. And so number one, you can see, you shall have no other gods before me. It's the exact same the Catholic one says. But if we look in number two, it says, you shall not make graven images and bow down to worship them. And this one is not what the second commandment says. It just appears to not be there. And then it says, you shall take the name of the Lord your God in vain. There you go. Remember the Sabbath, honor your mother, honor your mother. And it just goes down like this until you get to number 9 and number 10, which is basically our 10th commandment split into two. So they say you shall not covet your neighbor's wife as one, and then you shall not covet your neighbor's possessions as a separate commandment. And I'm going to go over the reasoning really quickly for why Catholics split this up the way that they do. So basically, they would argue that coveting your neighbor's wife and coveting your neighbor's possessions are in essence two different things. So they're going to argue that this might be called lust and this might be called coveting, while the Protestant side is going to say, the essence of this commandment is saying don't covet something that is your neighbor's. And so that's basically the reasoning behind it. And I don't have a problem with either reasoning, honestly. However, one thing I could say to this being lust is that also might just be encapsulated in do not commit adultery, because Jesus says if you even lust after someone in your heart, you've already committed adultery. So one could argue that don't lust is like basically encapsulated in the 7th commandment or the 6th commandment for you guys. But I'm not going to get too nitpicky with that kind of stuff. But overall, I would say I can see the reasoning behind splitting this up, and I don't have any complaints about it. It gets all the content there. And what they're going to say for this commandment is that our 1st and 2nd commandment are saying the same thing. Okay, so when ours says, you shall have no other gods before me, and you shall make no graven images, what the Catholic is going to say is that this is basically saying the same thing as this. The 1st and 2nd commandments are basically saying just don't commit idolatry, don't have other gods before him, don't bow down and worship anything. That's all the same commandment. And so they didn't feel the need to make the 2nd commandment say don't make graven images, because they say that is redundant. And they're also going to get this numbering from Augustine. And so that's kind of where this originates based on the research that I've done. And this is why I'm not going to really say that, like I said earlier, I'm not going to say that Catholics are just pagan idolaters that want to bow down to statues, because Catholics, they condemn idolatry, guys. So I want to make that clear for Protestants watching this. Catholics are not okay with idolatry. You might argue that some of their practices are idolatry, and we can talk about that another time, but we should say up front that Catholic theology and their catechism condemns idolatry as a mortal sin. And so we can't really say that they got rid of this for the sake of idolatry, because they condemn idolatry. And so we need to be a little bit more charitable with the way that we approach this conversation. And again, I think their reasoning is fine, and the fact that they're combining the 1st and 2nd commandments and saying one. This is my only critique, though, and this is where I'm going to give you guys a suggestion at the end, which I think would be helpful for the conversation. I think it would actually help the discourse a lot. So we need to go to the 9th and 10th commandment before I can give my suggestion on the 1st and 2nd commandment. So if you notice, this is a situation where the Catholics have 2 commandments and we have it combined into one. And here's a situation where we have 2 commandments and the Catholics have it combined into one, if we're going to accept the Catholic reasoning for those situations. But if you notice something, you shall not covet your neighbor's wife, and you should not covet your neighbor's possessions, is all here. Like, all the information is present in Commandment 10. If I read 9 and 10, and then I read 10 here, I'm going to say, yep, that's very obviously the 9th and 10th Catholic commandment combined into one. However, when you come up here, that doesn't necessarily translate. So it just says, you shall have no other gods before me, which is the exact same wording. And then commandment 2 just seems to be completely absent, like totally. Like, I don't see any language about graven images. And so that's actually going to be my one suggestion in moving forward in this conversation. And I kind of had one funny slide, like, why don't we just do 9 commandments where we combine the 1st and 2nd commandment? You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make graven images. And you shall not covet your neighbor's wife or possessions. And we could just have 9 commandments. But anyways, we'll probably keep it at 10. But anyways, so this is the one suggestion that I have. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make graven images and bow down and worship them. I would suggest for Catholics, if what you guys have really done is just combine these 2 into one, then to me it just seems like a very easy solution to just say, you shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make graven images and bow down and worship them. That should just be what your first commandment says. In the same way that when you guys made 2 commandments and we combined it into one, essentially, all the information's there. Don't covet your neighbor's wife or possessions. Neighbor's wife, possessions. It's all there. And in the same way, I think all the information should be there. And Catholics, before you get defensive, I just think this is a sensible thing to ask, because think about this. There's going to be people that are going to hear this talking point from Protestants that you guys are just idolaters that want to bow down to statues, and that is why you've removed the 2nd commandment. And if you just look at this, I can at least see where they're coming from, because the graven images part is not here. It's just absent. It's not there. And so if you were to just take yourself out of your Catholic paradigm for a moment and step into a Protestant's shoes that doesn't know anything about Catholicism and your theology, and maybe they've heard that you guys bow down to Mary and all this stuff, like that's all they know about Catholicism, then they're going to look at these 10 commandments and be like, wow, they got rid of graven images. That explains all the Mary stuff. That explains all the picture stuff. And I feel like this could just be very easily resolved by just doing this right here and just adding this. If what you guys are saying is true, because this is what Catholic.com says, CatholicAnswers.com, they're saying that you guys just combine these 2 commandments. If that is true, and that's really what happened, then why not just make it look like that's what happened? Why not make it look like those are 2 commandments in one? And I actually talked to a Catholic friend of mine, and he said that he thought this was a really good idea. And so, I don't know, guys, let me know. I really think that this will help the conversation be more charitable moving forward. Thank you so much for watching this quick video discussing the differences between the Protestant and the Catholic 10 Commandments. Hope you enjoyed it, and I hope that you understand that I'm really trying to help this conversation. I'm not trying to belittle anybody or talk down to anybody. I really want to help the popular level discourse kind of be raised a little bit. I noticed that Catholics and Protestants, they just kind of throw stupid insults back and forth at one another without really understanding one another. And I think that this is one small change that can be made that can move the conversation forward in a friendly and charitable way. So I hope you liked this video. Give it a thumbs up if you did. Subscribe to the channel if you're new and you want more content like this. This has been The Epitome. I'm your host, Nathan Bozeman. We'll see you around.